Hi, I'm Andy Glover and I am the team leader of HBC Chester. We're a Baptist church based up in the northwest of England, and for the last 7 years we've been transitioning and focusing in on how we might become a church that has a really strong discipleship culture and particularly uses the two vehicles, the vehicle of missional communities and huddles. And so I want to talk to you a little bit today about coaching huddles. I also have the privilege of being the team leader of Fresh Streams. And within the context of Fresh Streams, one of the things that I've begun to do in the last couple of years is to offer these coaching huddles to senior leaders or those who are ministers or assistant leaders in their church as an opportunity to see how they too could begin to grow personally as a disciple, but also to implement some of the tools, some of the rhythms, some of the principles that we've learned at HBC Chester that would help them create a strong discipleship culture and a context where their congregation members are making disciples that make disciples. My experience of being in a coaching huddle has been one of the real highlights of the last 7 years. And a coaching huddle is a powerful tool and something that I really believe now is essential for discipleship and leadership development. I've had the privilege of being in coaching huddles that have been led by Paul McConaughey, Rich Robinson, and more latterly with Nick Harding. And at HBC, they've become one of those vehicles that we use to help grow our pipeline of leaders. Now, a coaching huddle usually lasts about an hour, and they can take place maybe weekly, fortnightly, or sometimes monthly. In the context that I've been involved in within HBC, we find that our coaching huddles best run on a monthly rhythm. And so we use that the second Wednesday of every month. On an evening, we'll gather together for our coaching huddle. Now in HBC, we call these coaching huddles something else. Actually, what you call them isn't that important. The principles are what we are so focused on. So at HBC, we call these iPods, intentional places of discipleship. And so the way that it works at HBC, just to give you a little bit of insight, is I lead an iPod with some of the leaders in my church. We do that once a month. We go through the context and content of the material, and then the 4 people who are in that huddle, they then go and lead a coaching huddle for themselves, an iPod for themselves, and I also then lead another iPod. So we've been doing this now, like I say, for particularly the last 5 years, and it's become a really effective tool to really help that discipleship and that growth in individuals. In terms of the tools that we use, we've drawn heavily upon the tools that come out of the 3DM stable, Mike Breen, particularly some of his material from his book, Creating a Discipleship Culture. So we use some of those life shapes, although again, it's the principles that we talk about the most. So we will talk about your up, in and out, those 3 dimensions of your discipleship life, and we use the triangle just as a way of remembering our up life, our in life, and our out life. And the other particular shape that we talk a lot about is the circle, and that's because for me the discipleship question, or the 2 discipleship questions that form the basis of a coaching huddle, are: what is God saying to you? And then what am I doing about it? And so the learning circle provides a framework where We work around that circle. In the first half of the circle, we're asking the question, what is God saying to me? And we observe a sort of kairos moment. We discuss it, we reflect on it. And then as we go around the circle, we begin to think about, well, what am I going to do about this? How am I going to respond to what God is saying? And we begin to plan, and then we act, and then we're accountable to what we feel God has said to us. So like I say, the huddle will last around about an hour. And so in that hour, we are looking to look at 3 specific areas. We look at what we call the 3 C's of a huddle, these rhythms that we go through. And we won't do this every week, but over a period of time, we'll make sure that we've touched upon these 3 C's. The first C is character. How is God developing me as a person, as a disciple, and as a leader? Secondly, we look at competencies. We talk there about how is God developing my leadership skills and understanding of how I'm building principles into my own life and into the life of the church or organization that I lead. And then finally, we talk about our context. How am I applying what God is teaching me, what God is saying to me, to the challenges in my current context? And for me, the context thing has been really important because I've been a church leader now for over 25 years, and I know that there isn't really any one silver bullet that is going to cause my church to grow or my church to become healthy. There's not one program that I just need to find, and once I find that program, everything will begin to change. My context is so different from anybody else's context. And so those principles around character and competency are what we seek to apply into our context. For me, a really simple definition of a disciple, what is a disciple, is someone who is learning to be like Jesus, i.e. in their character. How are we working out our sort of the ministry of the Holy Spirit in me, producing the fruit of the Spirit in my own life? And then secondly, my competencies. How am I learning to do what Jesus did? How am I growing in my ability to hear God's voice? How am I developing my prayer ministry? How am I developing my ability to pray for people who are looking for God to heal them? How am I becoming more effective in that? And so as I go through these tools, I'm looking to see that growth in my own life. So when we have the coaching huddle, what happens is we divide the hour up into sort of different segments. And what usually happens is the first part of the huddle or the iPod is we will have some updates, we'll catch up, we'll hear some news. Hopefully a good news story will be in that moment, something that God has been doing. And we'll get some feedback on the accountability question. How did we do since the last huddle? What did we implement? How did we begin to process more what God was saying? Then we have some input. This is where, I guess, as the facilitator, it's my role to bring some input. And so I will use a tool, or we'll look at a theme, or we'll look at an issue, and we'll begin to unpack that, talk about it. And into that, we begin to sort of process together the learning circle. We observe, we discuss, we reflect together. And underneath that is that question, what is God saying to me as we talk together in this moment? And so what we're looking to do is then come out of that time of input and share together, talk together. And so I'm looking for those sort of a moment, a sort of like where we can, it's like a catalyst moment where God is speaking. There's a kairos moment that somebody might begin to hear God say something to them and observe something that's going on in their own lives. And so we're sort of processing that, and I'm facilitating the conversation and helping people to apply what that principle might be. So, for example, we might be talking, about let's talk about vision and the importance of having a clear vision. And so we'll define what we mean by vision. We'll talk about examples of what vision looks like, maybe in our church or in your church, the person's church who's on the huddle, or maybe in your missional community. And we'll stimulate that conversation and help clarify our vision, motivate our members to accelerate that development of vision in their own life and in their own context. What we're looking for are principles that we can apply. So my job is to facilitate that discussion. And so over the last few months, particularly in this COVID-19 context, where I think that the issue around discipleship has been amplified, I think the role of me as a leader, as a minister in the church, is to coach my people, is to give them tools, to give them the rhythms of life, to talk about what it is that sustains us in our own discipleship. And so to coach senior leaders is to give me an opportunity to help them as they seek to work out in their context, what does a discipleship culture look like for you? What are the tools that will best serve you? What are the rhythms of life on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis that will help sustain ministry? And how then can we implement some of that into our church so that our churches are places where people are becoming disciples, where they're maturing as disciples? And so what we're seeking to do is to raise up and release missionary disciples, people who are living missionally in their everyday lives. So the coaching huddle is really important to land itself around this question, or these two questions. What is God saying to you? And what are you doing about it? They're really the two discipleship questions that are at the heart of a coaching huddle. And so what I've tended to do in this sort of framework of the hours is we land the sort of final 10, 15 minutes of the coaching huddle. We're looking for that question, like, what is God saying to you? What are you going to take away from this conversation? A good question that I sometimes ask is, what question would you like me to ask the next time we meet in a huddle? That accountability is really important, and it's an accountability that is around low control. I'm not telling you what to do, but what I'm hoping to do is to facilitate a conversation, a discussion in the coaching huddle that will help you begin to hear what God is saying to you, and then for you to process that, work that through on your own with your leadership team and into the church or ministry opportunity that you have and the context that you're in. I found just that simple accountability, knowing that once a month or once a fortnight, I'm meeting again with the same group of people, and we start that conversation with, hey, how did you get on with that accountability question? And me as a facilitator, what I tend to do is I make a note of all those sort of answers, what are people saying? And we begin the next huddle, just going through that, what has been going on. And sometimes that will lead into a deeper conversation because somebody's really taken some time and processed it and begun to see God change a situation or begin to work in a different way. Or sometimes nothing's happened because life's taken over, and so we just reflect on that. We continually say that there's no shame, there's no guilt. We're in this together. We're encouraging one another. We pray for one another in a coaching huddle. We prophesy over one another. And as 1 Corinthians 14:3 reminds us, prophecy is about encouraging, strengthening, and comforting. And so I've really found the coaching huddle as a place where I've experienced that. Some of the values that underpin the huddles are friendship. There's obviously confidentiality. There's an honesty and vulnerability that comes out. I found it quite humbling at times how vulnerable people are, particularly when we use Zoom. And we've all become much more familiar with Zoom. as a platform over these last 9 months. And we use Zoom, particularly for the Fresh Streams coaching huddles. Obviously, in the church context, we would meet in person, but actually over these last few months, we've used Zoom for all of our iPods, and they've continued on a monthly basis during this last 9 months of 2020. One of the things that I encourage people when I invite them into a huddle is it's a place where you have a privilege of being discipled by me. Now, that I don't say that in a proud way, but I want to invest in people. So within my own church, people get invited into a iPod. We don't just put that out as a general invitation. We generally invite people in, particularly those who are carrying some leadership responsibility, either a missional community leader, they could be a youth and children's leader, they could be a worship leader. So you get invited in where there's going to be specific investment into your life. And so what we're looking for are these two qualities. We're looking for people who have that sense of availability. They're willing to prioritize the time when the huddle takes place or when the iPod takes place. And we're looking for those people who are accountable, that they're willing to learn and to take hold of the teaching and the principles and put them into practice. So, as I say, I've been in a coaching huddle over these last few years, and the ones that I've been in have been so helpful, where once a fortnight I've planned my diary so that I am available. It's a priority for me to be in the coaching huddle. I've turned up, I've listened, I've learned, I've heard God speak to me, I've applied that back into my own life and into the life of my church. And I can honestly say that the coaching huddle has become such a significant part of my ministry, both in terms of what I've received and now, hopefully, in the way that I'm facilitating coaching huddles and investing in other leaders. So I want to invite you to think about jumping into the conversation on Zoom a little bit later today, and to come and be a part of that conversation. Or if you're watching it at a later time, then drop me an email if you want to know more about coaching huddles. Just that opportunity to be invested in, that opportunity to ask the question, what is God saying to me? And then what am I doing about it? And to grow in your character, to grow in your competency, and to apply that into your context. That is what a coaching huddle is all about.